When night fell, in medieval Europe, time didn't slow down in the stone-walled monasteries. Time stopped. While the wind whispered through the trees outside, only one sound was heard inside: the deep, heavy echo of a distant church bell. This sound would start the night. Here, nights were not for fun, nor for escape, not even for rest. It was only for the soul to find peace. Imagine a medieval monastery: thick stone walls, narrow windows, flickering candlelight, and above all, silence and patience. This silence was not an emptiness. On the contrary, according to the monk's belief, it was a moment when one was closest to God. As the sun set, the last footsteps were heard in the monastery courtyard. The doors slowly closed. The footsteps ceased, and silence spread across the stone floor. After this moment, there was no need to speak. Indeed, no one spoke, because night was not the time for words, but for the inner voice. For the monks, night was not about falling asleep. Night was a test for them. In cold cells, on thin beds, while the body rested, the soul was expected to remain awake. For them, true peace was not in deep sleep, but in a calm consciousness. Now breathe slowly. Between these stone walls, in the flickering light of candles, we are in an age where time has not yet hurried. There is no action in this story. No noise, no sound, no rush. Only the atmosphere of the night, and people listening to the night. Soon we will tell you what happened in the monastery after sunset, how the monks prepared themselves on the threshold of night, and how silence turned into a ritual. For now, just get used to this silence. When the heavy wooden doors of the monastery closed, the sounds of the outside world were left behind. The howling of the wind, the barking of dogs from distant villages, and the uncertainty of the night all remained outside the thick stone walls. Inside, however, a completely different time flowed. In the Middle Ages, monasteries were not just places of worship. They were places where silence was taught, order was maintained, and life slowed down. Here, the monks did not disconnect from the world. They slowed the world down around their own axis. They would begin before sunrise. But while the effect of the night was still upon them, footsteps echoed in the stone corridors. These sounds were not hasty. On the contrary, each step was conscious and calm. The houses where the monks lived were small: a bed, a table, a candle, nothing more. This simplicity was not a deficiency, it was a matter of choice, because for medieval people, excess weighed heavily on the mind. Less possessions, fewer thoughts, and a deeper silence. At night, the monastery was semi-dark. Not completely dark, but not completely bright either. This dimness didn't keep the mind awake. On the contrary, it slowly brought it to a standstill. Monks didn't engage in long conversations before going to sleep. Speaking loudly was frowned upon anyway. Silence was the unseen rule of the monastery. A short prayer was recited before bedtime. The thoughts of the day were left behind. The tasks to be done tomorrow weren't carried into the night. Here, the purpose of sleep was more than rest. Sleep was the purification of the mind. It was the cessation of noisy thoughts. The stone walls didn't just cut off the cold, they also cut off the chaos of the outside world. And in the later hours of the night, the monastery would become almost as silent as a living being. The embers of the fire burned gently. The candles cast a flickering light. In this setting, sleep was not an escape. It was a natural arrival. Night had settled against the stone walls of the monastery. It was as if the walls were asleep too. But if you listened very closely, you could feel even the stones breathing. These walls hadn't been built in a hurry. Each stone had been placed patiently. Each stone had absorbed a monk's prayer, the silence of a night, the flickering light of a candle. At this hour of the night, there was no echo in the monastery. Footsteps were inaudible. Even sound slowed down here. Moonlight filtered through the narrow windows that stretched along the corridor, leaving a faint silver line on the stone floor. This line was neither a path nor a sign. It was simply a silent trace reminding one of the night's presence. The monks didn't speak at this hour. There was no need to speak anyway. Silence here was not a deficiency. It had become a language. Each room was a simple life. A wooden bed, a wool blanket, a small table, and a Bible left open on it. The pages were not turned by the wind, because even the wind could not affect the holy book. Even time moved slowly here. Before lying down on his bed, a monk would place his hands on his chest and take a deep breath. This breath was the last breath of the day. Long, calm, and heavy, with each breath the burden of the outside world was released. Fields, roads, rumors of war, names of kings, all remained outside these stone walls. Here there was only night, and the night judged no one. From afar, a single drop fell from the fountain in the monastery courtyard. Then another. These drops did not keep track of time, but they made one feel the time. The monks did not control their dreams as they fell asleep. Dreams came if they came, and they did not. Sleep was not a reward. It was considered like a precious trust. And the walls, they remembered everything but never spoke. That's why the nights here were so deep. That's why the silence felt so heavy yet peaceful. Now you are inside these walls too. As the moonlight reflects on the floor, your breathing slows and the monastery accepts you into its silence. As night slowly descends within the monastery, the meaning of time gradually fades. Here, time is not measured as it is in the outside world. There is neither a calendar nor a day eagerly awaited. Minutes melt away within the walls, hours dissolve in the silence. For the monks, these moments are the simplest yet deepest part of the day. They exist not to stand, but to be able to remain. Each of them would cease thinking the thoughts they carried throughout the day during these hours. Thoughts would gently blend into the darkness of the night. The wind would silently circulate in the monastery courtyard. It is neither harsh nor slow. It seems to be careful not to touch the stones. The leaves of the trees would rustle but not make a sound. They would only make their presence felt. These walls have seen much. They have remained far from wars, silently witnessing the rise of kingdoms. But most of all, they have witnessed firsthand the moments when a person is alone with themselves. Every night, the same questions aren't repeated. Every night, a different inner silence is born. One of them would stand in front of his small window. He wouldn't actually look out. His gaze wasn't directed beyond the stone wall, but inward. At that moment, neither the past was forgotten nor the future worried. Only the present existed. And now that was enough. At these hours, thoughts soften, they lose their sharp edges. One begins to be kinder to oneself. Judgments fall silent, expectations retreat. The only thing echoing within the monastery is a very deep peace. This peace doesn't shout, it doesn't show itself, it doesn't want to be noticed. It's simply there. The light of a lamp flickers. Then it dims a little more. As the light diminishes, the inner world expands. The eyes don't tire. On the contrary, they rest. The mind becomes heavy, as if returning from a long journey. No one wants to arrive anywhere on this night. As night progresses, the sounds inside the monastery diminish further. The traces of daylight seem to have completely disappeared. The moonlight passing through the courtyard casts a soft glow on the stone floor, and everything appears heavier, calmer than usual. At this hour, time in the monastery is not measured in hours. Minutes and seconds lose their meaning. They are replaced by slow breaths and long silences. For the monks, night is more a moment of introspection than rest. Steps are consciously slowed. Footsteps passing through the corridors strike the stone walls and disappear. The oil lamps lit in the small chapel illuminate the space with their flickering light. This light is neither bright nor completely dispels the darkness. It is just enough. It does not tire the eyes nor stimulate them. Prayers are silent. There are no loud noises. Every word seems to hang in the air and slowly dissolve. At these moments, the aim is not to speak, but to understand through silence. Everything that happens in the outside world is left behind. Wars, marketplaces, the noise of cities, they all remain outside these stone walls. The monastery has established its own order within the night. The most striking feature of this order is continuity. Every night is similar, but no night is exactly the same. The position of the moon changes, the direction of the wind differs, the flame of the lamp sometimes flickers earlier. These small differences are important to the monks, because life progresses through small changes rather than major events. Night is the perfect time to notice this. A monk sitting at a wooden table in a cell closes his eyes. He has no book in his hand, only thoughts. But these thoughts are not heavy. On the contrary, they pass silently through the mind. At these moments, the body relaxes, shoulders droop, breaths lengthen, and the heart completely breaks away from the rhythm of the day. The walls of the monastery preserve this tranquility. The stones, having witnessed the same silence for centuries, were accustomed to bearing the weight of the night. Nothing was rushed, nothing was forced. And this calm rhythm passed to the observer without them noticing. Thoughts slowed down. Eyelids grew heavy. The night continued to move forward in its natural flow. Tonight, the monastery is a little different from its usual silence. Everything seems calm again, but the old memories accumulated within the stones seem to have awakened. These walls remember not only the sounds of prayers, but also the lives that have passed through here over the centuries. Once, a young monk walked through these corridors. His feet were hesitant. His steps were not as balanced as they are today. He had not yet learned to be silent. Now only the wind moved through the same corridor. But the stones still bore the traces of those old footsteps. Sometimes monastery nights are like this. The silence is not empty. On the contrary, it is overflowing. The door of a cell closes slowly. The sound of the wood is... This sound does not awaken. It is only noticed, then disappears. In this part, the meaning of the night changes. Now, night is not just a time for rest. Night is a gap where the past and there is an old stone fountain standing in the courtyard. The water no longer flowed, but the moonlight still filled it. The monks who once stood here listened to this. Now only silence reigned here. This silence did not disturb anyone, because there is an acceptance in this silence. There is the knowledge that life is fleeting. Those who live in the monastery know this. That's why they don't try to cope with thoughts at much. They don't try to stop them. Thoughts come and find their way and go. A candle goes out. No one hastily lights a new one. Darkness is not an enemy. Darkness is another form of rest. At this moment, it is not the body, but the mind that relaxes. One unknowingly lets go of the burdens carried during the day. Questions don't seek answers. Memories don't demand meaning. Night in the monastery teaches one this. Not everything needs to be resolved. Some things should simply be left as they are. And with this awareness, the night deepens even more. Time softens even more. The boundary between yesterday and tomorrow disappears. Only this moment remains. Silent, simple, and dignified. Time didn't flow as it did in the outside world during the nights in the monastery. Here, the hours didn't advance. They stretched on. The burden of a day wasn't carried within a single night. Rather, the day was left to the night. For the monks, silence wasn't something to be avoided. Silence was a learned state. At the end of the day, as conversations ceased, the noise within the mind gradually receded. No one tried to silence their thoughts. They simply waited for thoughts to cease on their own. Throughout the night, small routines continued within the monastery. The controlled extinguishing of a candle, the slow closing of a door, silent steps carefully taken so as not to echo on the stone floor. None of these actions were done in haste, because haste is an unwelcome guest here. Not every monk went to sleep at the... Some remained awake into the later hours of the night, simply sitting. They simply sat. This sitting might seem meaningless from the outside, but this stillness would penetrate to the deepest recesses of the mind. Nights spent in the monastery teach one this. Not every thought needs to be answered. Not every question needs an immediate response. Some questions become lighter as they remain unanswered. In the outside world, people want to end the night. Here, however, the night is not something to be completed. The night is lived, slowly, silently, and within this calm rhythm the body also changes. The burdens lighten, breaths deepen. The heart would release the burden it carried throughout the day into the night. Monastery nights do not transform a person. On the contrary, they soften a person. And this softness would last until morning. Life within the stone walls is never completely cut off from the outside world. It's just that the noise from outside is heard here later. The lands surrounding the monastery have breathed with the same rhythms for centuries. The moisture of the soil, the direction of the wind, a stream flowing in the distance. None of this is put into words, but each is felt. As the day progresses and the heavy gates of the monastery close, the outside doesn't become completely silent. It just slows down. The footsteps from distant villages cease. The movements of people working in the fields stop. Even the sounds of animals become less frequent. At this moment, the world seems to recede. During the day, the roads around the monastery are filled with the tracks of merchants, travelers, and farmers. But at this hour, these roads are deserted. The coolness falling on the stones merges with the silence waiting in the earth. No one hurries. Time doesn't force anyone here. For those who live in this environment, the outside world is not a threat. On the contrary, it is distance itself that provides the balance. As the crowds recede into the distance, thoughts become clearer. The turmoil within the mind begins to dissolve with the silence outside. The plants and trees near the monastery have listened to the same wind for centuries. They neither speak nor tell stories. They are simply there. This state of being envelops those who live in. There is no obligation to do anything. There is no anxiety to rush anywhere. Even if a bell rings in the distance, it is not a call. just a gentle reminder that time is passing. No one is frightened, no one needs to prepare. At these moments, the same feeling is experienced inside and outside the monastery. Everything is as it should be, neither too much nor too little. When one enters this order, one slows down without realizing it. Shoulders relax, breaths lengthen, thoughts lose their weight. Therefore, these structures are not merely places of worship. They are also spaces where one re-establishes one's inner order. The slowing down of the outside world allows the inner world to calm down as well, and for the listener, this narrative ceases to be a story. It becomes an accompaniment. It's as if the person isn't speaking, but simply being there. At this point, the things being narrated don't end. They are simply pushed into the background, and the listener allows their own thoughts to slowly unravel within this silent order. The years spent within these structures were not measured by the calendars of the outside world. Here, time progressed not with the sound of bells, but with habits, repetitions, and silent acceptance. The days were similar but not identical. Every morning, feet touching the same stone floor, the wind passing through the same courtyard, bread left on the same table. But every day, the weight inside a person changed slightly. This life was not a life consumed rapidly. No one tried to get anywhere. No one was forced to reach a conclusion. For the people here, what mattered was not progress, but remaining static. Outside, the world was developing. Roads were getting longer, cities were growing, kingdoms were strengthening. But within these walls, another reality was preserved. Here, strength was being able to remain silent. Wisdom was not answering every question, and resilience was not fighting every thought. Sitting at the same table for long hours, looking at the same lines, writing the same sentence over and over. These repetitions were not a punishment, but a way to slow down the mind. In the modern world, people try to escape their thoughts. Here, however, people stepped aside from their thoughts. Something became apparent over time. Silence did not create emptiness. On the contrary, it created space. Within this space, memories surfaced. A distant childhood, a forgotten face, an unfinished regret. But no one chased them away, because what was taught here was, you don't fight the past, you just give it space. That's why nights in these places were not frightening, they were transformative. When a person learned to be alone with their own mind, sleep came naturally. Passengers from the outside world sometimes didn't understand this order. How do you not get bored, they would ask. How can you talk so little? These walls were not only built, they absorbed years of footsteps, glances, and quiet moments. Every stone carried the trace of hands that touched it. Every floor remembered the weight of those who passed across it. Time did not move here the way it did outside. Days were not measured by dates, but by familiarity. When light would appear, where shadows would settle, which door would softly creak, all of it was already known. People often believe repetition causes the mind to drift. Here, repetition became a form of comfort. The same sounds each morning, the same paths each evening, nothing unexpected, and because of that, the mind slowly learned to loosen its grip. When a door closed, it did not signal an ending. It simply marked the completion of a cycle. When a candle faded, darkness did not rush in. Instead, a gentle stillness took its place. Those who lived within these walls gradually forgot the speed of the outer world. Beyond them were journeys, conflicts, and urgency. Inside, there was something else. Unhurried movement, patient observation, moments allowed to exist without purpose. Time here it moved like a quiet companion. As the hours deepened, the long corridors seemed to stretch even further. Footsteps did not echo. The stone absorbed sound and held it gently. A pale glow slipping through a narrow window left soft shapes along the floor. They held no meaning, yet their presence felt complete. Sometimes a breeze from the outside shifted distant branches. That sound would drift inward, only to dissolve quietly into the walls. In those moments, one did not notice where they were, only where they were no longer. Not here were haste, noise, restless thought. What remained was simpler. Breathing, standing, moving without urgency, and at times, simply being still. Over time, something became. This place did not try to shape the mind. It offered no instruction and no direction. It did only one thing. It created space. Space for thought. Space for memory. Space for calm awareness. When someone stayed long enough, the inner noise softened on its own. No sound simply lost their weight. That is why the later hours felt different. Falling asleep was not a separation. It was a gentle release. Nothing truly ended. Everything only became heavier, slower, quieter. As the eyes closed, the mind remained at ease. There was something unusual about these structures. From the outside, they appeared rigid and unmoving. Within them, time bent softly. Minutes could stretch. Hours could pass unnoticed. No one counted. Because progress was never the goal. Presence was. Connection to rhythm, to order, to slowness. And once this was accepted, rest followed naturally. Time continues to move forward, but these stone walls never learned how to rush. For centuries, those who stayed here did not try to leave loud marks behind. They lived quietly, reflected deeply, and allowed their presence to fade without resistance. What still stands today is not only architecture, but a feeling that refused to disappear. Voices are gone, footsteps have softened, yet something calm remains, steady and unbroken. And now, as this journey slowly comes to rest, there is nothing left to chase, no place to hurry toward. Let your thoughts loosen their grip. Let the night settle at its own pace, and allow yourself to rest without needing to arrive anywhere at all.